Professor Rabia bin Halim of the University of Colorado School of Law, speaking on limiting oppression, duress, and unconscionability in Islamic law. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here with you today. I'll be discussing the equivalent doctrines of duress and unconscionability as they apply to Islamic law. Now, you may be wondering why I'm discussing these doctrines in the context of religious arbitration, and I'm doing so for a couple of reasons. First, when we look at the discourse from the anti-Sharia movement in both North America and in Europe, we find a presumption that Islamic law cannot or will not protect vulnerable parties, and that by de facto, secular civil courts will always protect vulnerable parties better than an Islamic arbitral body. I'm here to challenge that presumption. The second reason I'm discussing these two doctrines is in regards to something called delegation clauses. We increasingly find here in the United States delegation clauses present in arbitration agreements. And per the Supreme Court decision under first options and subsequent decisions by the court that have upheld the first options decision, if there is a delegation clause present within an arbitration agreement, the review of the enforceability of that arbitration agreement itself, including review of possible unconscionability or duress, would fall to the arbitration body that was designated rather than to a civil court. So part of the question I had in mind when I looked into this topic was, well, if there's a delegation clause present within a Muslim arbitration agreement, what would the review of possible unconscionability or duress look like if Islamic law was applied? And indeed, unlike the presumptions that we find within the anti-Sharia movement, Islamic law does in fact have protections of vulnerable parties. Those protections that are found within Islamic jurisprudence are primarily derived from a series of Quranic verses. These verses from the Quran include, "O you who believe, fulfill your contracts or covenants. O you who believe, do not consume each other's wealth or property between yourselves illegitimately. Do not devour one another's possessions wrongfully, not even by way of trade based on mutual agreement. Do not destroy one another. Indeed, God orders justice and beauty and giving to relatives and forbids immorality and abomination and oppression." Muslim jurists, based on these verses, built jurisprudence that condemned bargains that they deemed oppressive and unfair. They developed a number of different principles, such as the doctrine of unjust enrichment, contracts of necessity, and prohibitions against excessive speculation. In particular, as regards unconscionability, the concept of riba was important in providing protections for vulnerable parties. You may be familiar with the concept of riba as it regards Islamic finance, but the concept actually has far more broad-reaching implications than simply finance. Really, there's two different types of riba, and scholars have differentiated between them. Riba, in which a contracting party acquired an unlawful excess profit, and the riba in which a party used contract terms to gain an unlawful advantage by speculating on uncontrollable risks. Under the common law, quite a lot of agreements that are generally permitted would actually be prohibited under Islamic law due to economic exploitation. Additionally, Islamic law within the equivalent doctrine of duress or coercion takes into greater consideration the subjective experience of a victim than would be found within the common law. Islamic law takes into potential consideration a person's economic class, gender, geographic location, or age, rather than just taking the reasonable person standard, which is slowly changing within the common law. Islamic law really brings a more particularized evaluation of a victim's experience. In short, I argue that parties that find themselves in American Muslim arbitration can find greater protections through the application of the Sharia against oppression and exploitation than they might necessarily find with the application of common law in a civil court. Thank you.